I am going to be introducing to you Professor Abdel Razzaq Takriti, who teaches modern Palestinian and Middle Eastern history at Rice University. He's the author of numerous studies. Most recently, he launched the Tavra podcast on Daniel Denver's The Dig, a 16-episode series surveying the modern history of the Arab lands. Hopefully, we'll be able to do this without issue. But hello, Professor, are you there? Can you hear me? There's going to be some complications at first, but we'll get through them. Hopefully, but we'll have a hello. Oh, perfect.
Hi,
I can
how are
see
you? How's it going?
Okay, not only can I see you, I can also hear you. So this is going smoothly. I'll admit. I was definitely worried. Daniel made it seem like, I mean, he kept saying the words low-tech scholar when referencing you.
I'm not that bad. I mean,
Okay.
I can manage an app or two, but it's,
Okay. All right.
I think what he means is I don't spend my time, on social media that much.
Okay. Well, that's probably good for your mental health, especially right now, especially in recent times. Let me tell you, I did a thing at USC last night with a professor that invited me to speak to her students and whoever wanted to attend. And there was a letter campaign, apparently, by 27,000 letters saying that I should not attend, that USC must not have me on board or welcome me as a guest. So that's usually how it works on social media.
And these are probably just Israeli trolls and that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it was a Zionist group on campus that launched it, but I guess it didn't work in their favor. In any case, welcome to the broadcast. I've heard a lot about Daniel has sung your praises quite a bit in terms of your acumen and your knowledge over the region and the history. And originally, when we first were supposed to have this conversation, I wanted to ask you about the history of Hezbollah, because, of course, there are a lot of people in my community in general that are perhaps a little unfamiliar with Hezbollah, like where it started, why it started as a political movement. And I'm sure you know this already, but obviously in the Western media, it's very black and white, the way we communicate about America's adversaries and even America's allies. They're the good guys, and anyone that stands as a resistance to American intervention in the region is officially declared a state-sanctioned enemy. Terrorism. Let's start there. Let's start with the designation of terrorism. What do you as an academic think about this designation? Is this one that has any sort of like real legal precedent? Is that simply a socio-political term applied broadly to non-state actors that we want to deny habeas corpus to?
I mean, this is an excellent question, and I think the answer to it is contextual. So I would invite our audience members to think. Why is it okay, for example, for a state like the Israeli state to invade Lebanon, kill thousands of people, injure hundreds of thousands in places like Gaza, across Palestine, terrorize the whole region? If terror is about spreading fear, spreading insecurity, that's certainly what that state is doing. However, because it's a state actor that is supported by the West, that is never described as terrorism by Western countries, even though the Israeli military is viewed in the Middle East and across the Middle East as the largest terrorist force in the region. So it is all relative, it is all contextual, it depends on how you view things. In terms of its impact, actually, the Israeli state has terrorized way more people than any of the designated terrorist groups that the United States designates as terrorists. So that's point number one. Point number two has to do with legality. The international order, as it stands, favors state actors against non-state actors. And that means that it has always had a negative attitude towards liberation movements in general. and these were often prone to be described as terrorists. For example, the African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela, was considered to be a terrorist organization. In the United States, it only ceased to be a terrorist organization in 2008, believe it or not.
Yeah.
The FLN, the National Liberation Front in Algeria, which liberated Algeria from a century and 3 decades of French colonial rule, brutal rule that killed more than 1 million people, that organization was described as a terrorist organization. The Irish Republican Army was described as a terrorist organization, or was designated as such. The state actors against which they were fighting were not counted as terrorists, even though the damage they caused to civilians, to women, children, men, elderly men, everybody in society was indescribable. You can't even begin to describe the scale of it. So we should always approach these words with caution and understand where they come from.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it in terms of like the calculation of Israeli horror never being designated as an act of terror, even though it absolutely suits. If this was a designation applied evenly, Israel's actions would be considered in the exact same vein, because the impact of it is the same, causing tremendous amounts of psychological harm beyond the intended targets. And in many instances, the intended targets are broadly civilians regardless.
The impact is worse, actually.
Yeah.
Because now they're carrying out a genocide and
Yes.
there's no talk about anything. Like, who's standing up to them as they're massacring people en masse? And now in direct and indirect ways, it's way worse than terror. Genocide is the worst crime in history possible.
Yeah.
For you to come and destroy already up to 15% of the population of Gaza has already been annihilated through these policies, according to public health experts. This is very, very dangerous.
Absolutely. So the question I guess I have is, we are talking about resisting Israeli occupation. And I guess this brings up the first question I wanted to ask you, which is about Hezbollah in its inception and its modern iteration. If you could give us some historical background as to how Hezbollah came to be, that would be wonderful for a lot of people in my audience that might not know.
Well, I mean, the first point to note is again the context. How did Hezbollah emerge and why did it emerge? It emerged in the context of the Israeli occupation of Lebanon in 1982. In the 1970s, many of the cadres that formed Hezbollah were involved in resistance against the Israeli state, but it was through involvement in Palestinian-led movements that were stationed in Lebanon. Now, why were these movements in Lebanon in the first place? It's because the Israeli state was created on the debris of Palestine. It had actually, there was no such thing as Israel before 1948. It came about in 1948. It's a settler colonial formation, mostly comprised of Eastern European Jews that came on a Palestinian Arab land. What happened is they expelled a lot of people across the region. Many of them ended up in Lebanon. With time, these people began to form national liberation movements that sought reclaiming their land. They sought liberation and return for the Palestinian refugees and those that were living in Palestine. So the Palestinian aspect is very important to understand in this equation. And that's important for our listeners today. Sometimes they might wonder, why the hell does Hezbollah care about Gaza? Or why is it so connected to the Palestinian cause? That's the context to that. Now, of course, most of Hezbollah's members, in fact, all of them come from the Shia sect in Lebanon. Lebanon is a country that is governed by a sectarian system that was created by French colonialism there. They divided people by sect. And one of the most important sects is the Shia sect there. However, it was always underrepresented in the Lebanese political system. And as a result, they found common cause with the Palestinian refugees that were expelled by the Israeli state to Lebanon historically. They had good and strong social connections with them. They were joined also by class interests because they were poor and the Palestinian refugees that were expelled there were poor. The geographic interconnections, the south of Lebanon, where most of the Shias are concentrated, is very interconnected with the north of Palestine, which is where most of the Palestinian refugees that ended up in Lebanon come from. So all of this meant that there was enormous sympathy for the Palestinian cause. There was an enormous understanding that Israel as a settler colonial state is a threat to Lebanon. not just Palestine. It's a threat to the whole region. And this
Yeah.
is the experience that Hezbollah fighters went through before Hezbollah was created in the 1970s. Then in 1982, the Israeli invasion happens. Israel invades Lebanon. As what we're seeing today, they're claiming that they wanted security for themselves, but in fact, they're always expanding. There's no security expected for anybody else except for the settler colonists there. This is the general attitude, which is, it's similar to settler colonists populations everywhere. They think their lives are more worthy, that the security of others is less important. And we see this in American pronouncements today, Hasan. Like, why is it that the Biden and his entire team just keep on speaking about defending Israel? What about defending Palestinians? What about defending Lebanese? What about defending Iranians? What about defending Turks? Anybody in this region that is affected by this aggressive settler colonial state? They do not matter.
Yeah.
So this is the context to the emergence of Hezbollah. In 82, Israel invades. It kills 20,000 people. It destroys the whole place. It was the worst invasion that we had seen until the Gaza genocide. It was really horrific in 1982. And they broke every international norm. They occupied a major Arab capital, Beirut. And in the process, you started to have a resistance movement emerging against them. Now, that resistance movement, in the case of, there were multiple ones, but from the Shia quarter in Lebanon, Hezbollah came about. It included fighters that had fought before in the Palestinian Revolution. It also included people that were rejuvenated by the Iranian Revolution. They saw what had happened in Iran, and they decided that they're going to follow an Islamic path towards revolution. Previously, many of these people had joined the left or had been part of anti-colonial resistance in the Palestinian movement. Now, they were inspired by a new model that was offered by the Iranian Revolution. And in theological terms, strictly theological terms, our viewers may or may not be familiar with this concept. They adhere to something called Vilayat al-Faqih, or Wilayat al-Faqih, as we would say in Arabic. That means the governance of the jurists. They agreed with the Iranian line that was proposed by Ayatollah Khomeini, which said that the Islamic Ummah, the nation, has to be ruled in accordance with the precepts of religion, through the interpretation of the jurists. So that was a controversial line in Shia circles. It continues to be, but Hezbollah were adherents to that line, and in Lebanon they became associated with it. They developed a very close relationship with the post-revolutionary Iranian government.
Yeah. And some of the most horrific acts of mass murder that some people in the chat might recognize in 1982 was, of course, the Sabra and Shatila massacre, where the IDF struck a mostly Palestinian and Lebanese Shia compromised area in the city of Beirut, where Christian militias inside of Lebanon, Phalangist militias inside of Lebanon, committed heinous atrocities and were directly supported by the IDF in that process. And the conservative estimations are between 1,300 and 3,500 civilians that were ruthlessly slaughtered. Many of the immediate propaganda that came out, the atrocity propaganda that you might have even heard from the likes of Joe Biden, as a matter of fact, without any sort of evidence whatsoever, repeated post-October 7, were actually real documented atrocities that occurred in Sabra and Shatila. And the only reason why I bring this up, I think, is to help people understand the collective conscious and the collective psyche of the Lebanese and the Palestinian refugee population in these areas in terms of the way that they analyze Israeli acts of violence, Israeli incursions, just so people are clear.
Hasan, I recorded 40 hours with Daniel Denver on the Dig, the podcast, the famous podcast. We did a series called Thawra, just detailing this history. It is a very complex history, but I would encourage our listeners to check it out. But seriously, for us to understand what's going on, we have to realize that there's an accumulation of both Israeli colonial violence, but also American support for it. The reason why Sabra and Shatila happened isn't just because the Israelis unleashed their militias that they had trained and armed these Lebanese militias that were under their control, and it wasn't just because their army besieged the camp and facilitated this process. It wasn't because they gave the order for it. It's more than that. It's part of the total betrayal of the United States to the agreements that it had signed. The U.S. had sent an envoy in '82 demanding that the PLO exit, and the PLO said, the Palestine Liberation Organization, said, okay, you know what, we'll exit, but how do we guarantee the safety of the women and children and the elderly people that will be left in their Palestinian refugee camps, given the fact that our fighters will no longer be there to defend them? And the U.S. gave guarantees. The whole international system was supposed to uphold these guarantees. Nothing happened. Israelis were allowed to go, kill, inflict this wanton destruction on the Palestinian people. It was one of the worst massacres in our history. Now, of course, in Gaza, everything pales in comparison to Gaza because it's full-on genocide. But up till that point, seriously, these heinous crimes were unbelievable. So, of course, that led to the resistance option that was proposed by Hezbollah to become very popular. Because, look, people here talk, they talk about, okay, why aren't the Lebanese people peaceful? Why aren't the Palestinian people peaceful? Why aren't the Iranian people? All of this talk. I'm like, everybody's peace-loving. Actually, in our region, we need peace for us, because the level of destruction imposed on us is much bigger. But there's a big difference between peace and pacification. Pacification means that I keep on beating you up. I'm the bully that will actually destroy your life, and your job is to completely submit and keep on taking hits whenever I want to give you hits. And that is an unreasonable thing to expect any human being to accept. Our people are human, despite the fact that a lot of American officials don't seem to think that, despite the fact that certainly Israeli racist officials will never accept that. This has to do with racism as much as it has to do with anything else, Hasan.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, I guess, the modern iteration of Hezbollah as well, if you don't mind. And then I want to move into Iran a little bit as well, considering that this conversation was supposed to center around Hezbollah and its reception in the region broadly as a resistance force against Israeli incursion, specifically both in Lebanon, but also as a deterrence factor against Israel's ongoing genocide and occupation in Gaza. But since then, of course, Iran has chosen to retaliate for Israel assassinating IRGC commanders inside of Beirut and in other places, as well as a direct violation of Iranian sovereignty when Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the Politburo chief of Hamas, the person that was the principal negotiator in the hostage negotiations that were ongoing. Israel did this, of course, in Tehran, which was a direct violation of Iranian sovereignty, which Iran said that they would inevitably retaliate towards. And it seems like today was that retaliation. But in terms of Hezbollah, a lot of the conversation, in my estimation at least, a lot of the conversation surrounding Hezbollah and the Israeli incursion into Lebanon has been basically repackaging the exact same type of propaganda that we saw with respect to Hamas, that Israel wasn't simply pummeling Gaza into submission, that it wasn't engaging in an act of genocide, but instead was actually liberating the Palestinian people from the treacherous nature of Hamas. And now the exact same propaganda, it almost reset, right? Where Israel is technically liberating the Lebanese population from Hezbollah. Is there any truth to this kind of propaganda in your estimation? Or what does the broad reception of Hezbollah look like in the eyes of the Lebanese population?
Well, I mean, I've alluded earlier in the interview to the sectarian nature of Lebanese politics. Unfortunately, as a result of two civil wars in the 19th century, and as a result of various, influences, including a few decades of French colonialism, Lebanon was designed as a sectarian state. And what that meant is that your religious background determines who you are as a Lebanese citizen. That has serious implications for politics. It means that people are ossified, they get frozen into their sectarian identities when it comes to political behavior. And that meant also that you get political allegiances often correspond to sectarian lines. There are challenges to this. The Lebanese left was always secular, for example. There have been movements that have emerged that have mobilized people across religious and sectarian divides, including Hezbollah in certain moments, by the way. And Hezbollah still has an audience outside its immediate sect. However, the Israeli policy has always followed a doctrine that they've had since the early days of the Zionist movement, before there was even an Israeli state. And that doctrine was called the peripheries doctrine. For people that want to Google it, they can check that out. The idea was always,
what was it again? So can you say that again?
The peripheries doctrine. So their notion is to focus on minorities and create tension between different religious groups or tribal groups or national groups in the region surrounding them, so that they could actually weaken the regional system and be able to establish their settler colonial dominance in the region. That's not particular to the Israeli state, by the way. Settler colonial states often use these tactics of divide and rule. In Lebanon, they've used it extensively. And in Lebanon, what has happened is they didn't invent the sectarian divide there, but they've certainly exploited it. And they were bound to exploit it. They're exploiting it now. Look at the areas they're bombing. They're actually targeting a religious group. They're targeting a religious minority in the region, and nobody's talking about that, by the way. That every village, every town, every city that's being targeted is a Shia area. This is actually terrible. It is it's a major religious crime against a religious group in the region. But they're also trying to create tension.
Not dissimilar to ISIS, I might add. In the exact nature, whether it be to shield with a false religious justification to shield your actions, or to target religious minorities in the region.
Yeah, I mean, and the only thing that we can say about Israel is that the Israeli government at the moment and the whole political system of Zionism is that it's driven by settler colonial precepts. They will use any method, including targeting religious groups, to achieve their objectives. And they've done it before. They try to co-opt certain religious groups sometimes. They try to marginalize others. It's fair game for them to kill people and to target people. They don't care. And this is the unfortunate reality in our world today, is that they're given license to do that. I mean, because they're backed by the world's biggest empire, which happens to be the country that we live in here, the country that we pay taxes to, the country that we work in, and in this setting, it's creating a lot of dissonance for a lot of people here. How can we be supporting a project that is based on the destruction of the entire regional neighborhood? This is a state that knows nothing but escalation, expansionism, and total war. It is a martialist state. And again, this is not particular to it. Settler colonial states tend to behave that way. Apartheid South Africa was wreaking havoc on the entire southern part of the African continent. They were spreading chaos there. Pied Noir in Algeria were totally genocidal in their mindset, and they killed millions of people, like over 1 million Algerians. That's how these settler groups behave. But why is it that they're given sanction to behave that way? There's no limit placed on them. It's outrageous, Hasan.
Absolutely. in terms of the Iranian retaliation, or I guess even with the existence of Hezbollah, much has been said about Hezbollah's actions in Syria or even in its domestic affairs inside of Lebanon. But Israel has consistently reiterated the position that the assassination campaign, which of course targeted thousands of civilians alongside a couple key leaders, which are simply regarded as collateral damage in Western media. The assassination campaign was conducted specifically to try and decouple Hezbollah from Gaza. Could you speak to the similarities within the Ansar Allah regime as well, or if that's outside of your purview or expertise, that's also perfectly fine. I didn't ask about that to Daniel
No, that's
earlier,
that's totally fine. I mean,
but
I can tell you something.
yeah.
Go ahead, Hasan.
Well, the question I have is the question I have, I guess, is that what do you say to people again that consider Hezbollah to be a terror group and fundamentalist overall? I guess it's that has nothing to do with the reasons as to why Israel assassinated Hassan Nasrallah or the leadership of Hezbollah, and everything to do with the fact that Hezbollah was a deterrence mechanism against Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza.
Let me tell you an interesting thing, Hasan. In our country here, in this country, when we encounter people usually who attack Hezbollah as fundamentalists and all these groups as fundamentalists, they tend to be fundamentalists themselves. People in the Republican Party who belong to actual evangelical movements, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. They believe in religious conservatism. That's what Hezbollah believes in. I would say the religious conservatism Hezbollah is milder, actually, because they're not so obsessed with certain things like abortion, and they don't spend their whole time focusing on attacking gay rights and that sort of thing. So in a way, actually, the groups here are way more conservative. However, if what we're talking about is religious conservatism, I might disagree with that personally. I'm not a religious conservative, okay? But the issue here is not their Islamic character. What they actually don't like about Hezbollah, and let me be very clear here, the U.S. has historically supported Islamic groups in many parts of the world against what they perceive to be communist infiltration. So in Afghanistan, for example, they produced Al-Qaeda to fight the Soviet Union. Okay, the predecessors to Al-Qaeda were actually created by the U.S. and with Saudi funding. Okay, and this is something that's well established in the scholarly literature, Hasan. There's no doubt about it.
Oh yeah,
it's a fact. So they don't have a problem with religion. They don't have a problem with religious fundamentalism. The issue they have with is where is it directed? And let's be clear, Hezbollah is way less religious fundamentalist than any of the groups that we have described, Qaeda or anything like that.
I mean, even the current Saudi administration that we are closely aligned with, on top of Saudi Arabia obviously being a wonderful ally to the state of Israel as well.
And they're less fundamentalist than the Israeli state. The Israeli state is officially now ruled by Jewish supremacist parties that say that they actually say this on a regular basis, that there should be, one of the parties is called Jewish supremacy. They consider themselves to be superior to Palestinians, superior to Arabs, better than them. They should be oppressed forever. It's an officially racist doctrine based on religion. And in the case of some of these parties, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, these are real zealots. So let's not now spend too much time thinking that the problem with Hezbollah is their religious affiliation. Their problem with Hezbollah is their geopolitical alignment, and that's what their issue. There's been always a fundamental issue in this region. Nobody wanted a Zionist project in this region. Nobody wanted a settler colonial state in this region from within the region. It was always a project imposed from outside. And it's not a project that is good, even for the settler colonial community itself. And we know this in the case of South Africa and other cases. The Afrikaans for a long time deluded themselves, thinking that they could live forever, ruling over a black majority, having total disregard to their regional neighborhood. We have the same situation now with this Israeli state. Hezbollah, other groups, they will not accept this idea that the Israeli state should be allowed to go and massacre Palestinians en masse, carry out a total genocide without anybody intervening. If they accept that idea, then they're also setting a serious precedent for themselves. Let's say the Israelis finish the job in Gaza. Finish the job, by the way, has a horrific meaning. It means kill everyone. That's what they're doing now. Okay? If they do that, then Lebanon will be next. Then the rest of the region will be next. It's a very dangerous phenomenon. Trump now is talking about annexing the West Bank to Israeli state. The West Bank will be next.
Absolutely.
This project has no limits.
One other aspect of this, for I guess like Western squishy liberals who are like, oh well, Hezbollah is this or that, is the reality that, and this is a J-Post article that I have in front of me, that Israel also, in the targeted assassination strikes that they conducted in Lebanon in these dense suburbs, densely populated with civilians, also engaged in assassinations on 3 PFLP leaders in the Kola district of Beirut. Now, the PFLP is not a religious group at all. As a matter of fact, it's simply a Marxist group. This is, of course, very similar to, once again, another assassination that Israel had engaged in with Ghassan Kanafani. Again, famously not a very religious person, but simply a Marxist. And to make matters worse, of course, to add insult to injury, the PFLP leaders that were killed were not actually engaged in the tit for tat cross-border missile campaigns that were being conducted between Hezbollah and Israel, which Israel was still responsible for 82% of the of the munitions being deployed there. Having said that, this simply shows once again that it has nothing to do with even border security for the northern territories of Israel, but instead has everything to do with the fact that Israel gets to kill whichever leadership or whichever commander or whoever says that they do not like Israel's genocide in the region.
I mean, let's imagine that it is about border security. Let's imagine that for a second. They always use security arguments. Okay, why should they have security and nobody else in the region should have security? I mean, this is the real fundamental question here. What does security mean? I mean, their version of security is: I dominate the region. I do not give freedom to the Palestinian people. I do not create democracy. What I create is a Jewish state that is supremacist in character, that rejects people from other religions, rejects people from other ethnicities, and has a project of permanent domination over them. That is not acceptable. By the way, there's a lot of Jewish descent in this country and elsewhere now around this, especially amongst younger people. So
yes.
They're upset that this settler colonial state is actually using the good name of Judaism to pursue its actions, because it has nothing to do with Judaism. No religion actually would sanction the sort of actions that are being taken now by the Israeli state. It is a genocidal state. It is a state that has been described by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty, and by other major human rights organizations as an apartheid state. It is a state that has broken more UN resolutions than any other state in history. It is, in fact, if you want the technical definition of a rogue state, it fits that definition. It is a rogue state. It is a state that goes rogue against the entire international order. Now we have ICJ decisions on it. It doesn't want to accept it. The International Court of Justice has ruled that it's plausibly genocidal. They don't care. It has ruled that they should stop what they're doing in Gaza. They don't care. And now in Lebanon, they're not caring either. And assassinations is one of their methods. They use it against everyone, Hasan, as you've noted. They've used it before against the leaders of the PLO, the leaders of Fatah. These were not Islamists. They've used it against PFLP leaders. They've used it against people from multiple designations and groups. They've used it against our Christian leaders. Somebody like the great poet Kamal Nasser. These were people that were murdered because they were intellectuals, because they were thinkers, because they were actually calling for anti-colonial revolution. And there's a big difference between anti-colonial revolution and terror, by the way, Hasan. Now, speaking of Hezbollah, I'm not a Hezbollah member. I'm not a Hezbollah supporter. I have no affiliation whatsoever with that. Okay. But however, at the same time, I'm somebody who's an analyst and understands the region. And I will tell you something very clearly. Should the Israeli state cease its project of domination in this part of the world, should it give freedom to the Palestinian people, should it stop threatening the people of Lebanon, should it stop its expansionism across this region and its project to continue settler colonial domination, should it democratize and actually say, okay, we'll be a state that's not based on religion, it's going to be based on citizenship, we're going to allow the Palestinian refugees to return, we're going to allow everybody to vote, we're going to consider everybody to be sisters and brothers in citizenship, then people would not have a problem with it. But they cannot accept that. And if you say this, they'll tell you, oh, you're against Israel's right to exist. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm against the existence of a racially based order of domination. I'm not against the Israeli people living in this territory. They don't come from our lands, okay? But they've been in them for quite a while now. You know, some of them have been there for one generation or two. A few of them have been there for 3 or more. You know, that's okay. We're not against anybody's presence in this region so long as they actually respect everyone else, integrate with everybody else. Stop thinking that you're above the law, above international norms, that you can get away with the genocide. That's the problem with settler colonialism. It creates an order in which the leaderships imagine this, and they start then mobilizing the whole populace around settler colonial visions of domination. No, I seriously believe, and we must insist on a joint future for everyone in this region, including, by the way, Israelis. I mean, this colonialism does not benefit them. It's not good for them. It's not good for anybody. You know, Frantz Fanon, the great anti-colonial thinker, he was a great psychologist. I'm sure you're familiar with him, Hasan, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote studies about how settler colonialism creates a total collapse in the psychology of both the colonizer and the colonized. It has serious repercussions for everybody.
No, absolutely. It is. I mean, you see it in Israeli society, both with the direct consequences of like Israel's bloody war and genocide around the entire region. You have their economy downgrading. You have ports that are now bankrupt. You have Israeli economy collapsing entirely. It's already been a state that has been completely funded and facilitated and propped up by first the British and then, of course, the United States of America. But even beyond that, I feel like people behave as though the supply of bombs is infinite, and people behave as though there is an endless amount of bloodshed that they can engage in without incurring any sort of penalties. But also on top of that, I think from a more holistic approach, I think that the Israeli psyche has been collectively broken in terms of the way that they analyze their role in the region. And I think that there is a steady cycle of dehumanization in the form of social conditioning, in the form of propaganda that needs to justify the violence that is a necessity to maintain an apartheid, even when you are not conducting a genocide, right? And I think that also has caused many Israelis that we see, at least on Twitter, on social media, behave in incredibly violent ways, not recognizing why they are becoming a pariah state, not just in the third world, not just in the global south, where Israel was always viewed as a settler colonial pariah state, but now even in Western Europe, which is actually relatively new. I mean, I've spoken about Palestinian emancipation for almost a decade at this point in my professional commentary career, and I've never seen the attitudes shift so wildly in the direction of the recognition of the humanity of Palestinians before. I think that Israeli society as a whole does not recognize that and does not understand what those consequences will be. I do, however, think the Israeli government understands that reality, and I think that the last ditch desperate attempts are coming from the government, both with Benjamin Netanyahu's personal ambition in staying in power, so he doesn't withstand any sort of like prosecutorial scrutiny. But also on top of that, I think there are people in positions of power within Israel and even in the American State Department, the ideologically committed to Israel's death and destruction, that see that basically see the writing on the wall in terms of the way that the globe is seeing Israel, and are saying like, this is your last opportunity to grab as much territory as possible.
That's the problem. They do see it in these terms, but also some of them see it in messianic terms, in religious fundamentalist terms, where they think that actually now is the time to eradicate the Palestinians, to take over the entirety of what they consider to be the Holy Land, and then basically establish a completely a land free of non-Jews there. And this is a problem. And then, of course, as they defend this project, which is rooted in racial supremacy, the Israeli officials have also weaponized a very legitimate and historically valid issue, which is, of course, that of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is one of the greatest challenges that the world faced, certainly in the Second World War, and we've seen it materialize in the Holocaust. It was appalling. It was horrible. It was a European invention, and has resulted in the destruction of much of Europe's Jewry. But to come and say that critiquing a very violent, racially supremacist system, that of Israeli settler colonialism, is equivalent to anti-Semitism is absolutely outrageous, and it is an insult to the memory of millions of innocent Jews that have perished on the hands of anti-Semites in Germany and elsewhere. It is also totally disrespectful to the idea of preventing genocide in the future. I mean, now what we're seeing in Gaza now is genocidal. We must prevent it. And you can't kill all these people as Benjamin Netanyahu and then play victim. Benjamin Netanyahu is not a victim. Okay? He is an aggressor. He is a bloodthirsty demagogue who is carrying out a genocide. And his entire cabinet is in it. And actually, currently, the current U.S. government is fully involved in it. So this whole system has a problem in it. And they realize that there are shifts in American public opinion around this, that there are shifts amongst the youth. There's a huge shift in Jewish public opinion around this, especially in the United States. Nobody wants to accept this anymore. So something is happening, something profound is happening. However, in the meantime, there's a lot of people suffering, Hasan, and that's the bit that people like you and me worry about. Because yes, eventually these projects will self-destruct. They will actually, they will not go anywhere, because it's a project rooted in a vision of permanent injustice. That doesn't work. Visions of permanent injustice produce too many enemies, because you oppress people too much. I mean, it happened in Haiti. I'll give you an example. In Haiti, the first great anti-colonial revolution of our time, of modern times, happened in Haiti. The whole population was enslaved. Had a bunch of slavers that were saying everybody is under the boot. You have an enlightened leader comes in, Toussaint Louverture, a wonderful black revolutionary, formerly enslaved person who goes and manages to organize people, and they create one of the greatest revolutions of all time. Possibly the greatest, actually, most inspiring for sure. He says, I just want us to be sisters and brothers with the colonizer. We just want to be French citizens. We just want to be equal. And they go and imprison him, kill him, and betray him. So that leads then to the emergence of a much different vision. That's less inclusive of the colonists. Dessalines leads a much more violent, war of liberation. And we end up with a different situation. This is what settler colonialists do. We don't want that to happen. We can say they're going to self-destruct, they're going to create that. We don't want that to happen. We don't want them to also kill a lot of people along the way, which is exactly what they're doing now. Somebody has to come and put some common sense into this situation. Now, on the Hezbollah side, they have actually been very restrained. Okay, up until 2000, almost all their operations, in fact, all of their operations, were geared towards getting the Israeli troops out of Lebanon. Let's not forget, and this is the context that our viewers have to remember, Israel occupied Lebanon directly for many, many years. You know, it had control over the Lebanese south from 78 onwards. It had various forms of control there and occupation. It has also developed proxy groups allied to it there that were wreaking havoc and causing major insecurity. These were gangsters, you know, the South Lebanon Army and others, very vicious, and they were just dominating the people. That's the original struggle that they had with Hezbollah. From 2000 onwards, our main issue with Hezbollah is to make sure that the Palestinians never get supported, first of all, and make sure that Hezbollah does not get activated in favor of Iran in any confrontation that the Israeli state wants to have with it. And here, what that meant, was that they're willing to go into a serious war. In 2006, they went and destroyed large parts of Lebanon, killed a lot of people. Again, people have historical amnesia. They forget that this violent settler colonial regime has waged war on the people of Lebanon for decades. You know, and then, of course, Hezbollah was also restrained with them. You know, it allowed for a UN force to come into the territory and act as a buffer zone, even though, by the way, that should not happen. Settler colonial states should not be protected, actually, by the UN or anybody else. They should be pressured by the whole international community to seize their settler colonials. You want the honest truth. But no, in this reality, Hezbollah was very, very restrained. Okay, it understands that there's an international order that supports the settler colonial state. It's very restrained. Now,
same with Iran as well. And there's a very simple calculation here. If you look at the Iranian retaliation that occurred today, and you look at the actual civilian casualties, despite the fact that Iran demonstrated its capabilities this time with the obvious expertise that they can penetrate through the Israeli security, that Iran does have the capabilities of if it wanted to choose to do so, strike targets at scale, civilian targets as well at scale if they chose to do so, and yet they struck 3 military targets today. The amount of people that Hezbollah in its tit for tat bombing campaigns against Israel, and the amount of people that Iran has killed in its retaliation against Israel is laughable in comparison to the untold amount of the deaths of thousands of people both in Gaza and the deaths of now 1,000 at least people in Lebanon that Israel has engaged in. So in terms of the civilian casualty, in terms of the enemy combatant versus civilian ratio, if we're going to look at this in a cold and calculated way, obviously Israel does come across as the far greater evil if the morality was made to be an even playing field, which it is not. Obviously, there is a nuclear armed superpower here that is backed by the largest hegemonic superpower on the planet that is doing this death and destruction as a settler colonial state. We're not even considering that. But even if you were to consider it on an even playing field, then yes, the restraint is obvious in terms of the way that these actors, non-state actors, or I guess Hezbollah is in a unique position because they are a part of the Lebanese parliament as well. And also Iran as a state actor has demonstrated restraint time and time again.
I mean, you know, you have here the settler colonial state engaging in regular assassinations. They've killed most of Hezbollah's leaders in this moment, and still the response was restrained. You know why? Because at the moment, Iran and Hezbollah do not want a regional war. That's an Israeli desire. They want a regional war so that they could perpetuate the genocide, get an American green light for even greater weapons shipments to them, greater financial support for them. They want to unleash a full war machine and drag the region into a permanent long-term war. That is a horrific outcome, but it's the outcome that they want. And through that outcome, Netanyahu can stay in power. Ben Gvir and Smotrich can realize their messianic and pursue their messianic visions. And the whole region then is dragged into the abyss. This is the objective. Now, the Iranians have not played that game for a variety of reasons. They know that their actual military power is limited. They know that their financial power is limited. That does not mean they're powerless, by the way. It is a major country. In this region, it has always played a major role, and it will continue to play a major role. However, it is a country that is under siege economically. It is a country that has suffered a lot from U.S. sanctions, from U.S. marginalization in the international system. Its relationship with the U.S., by the way, is far more complicated than just being reduced to the Palestinian cause or the because there was also an Iranian cause in relation to the U.S. That's why the Iranian Revolution happened. There was a problem with the U.S. dominating Iran, carrying out a coup against democratic forces there, bringing in the Shah and the security state. It's a long history.
Yet another instance where more moderate secular forces, or more moderate and even, dare I say, social democratic or socialist forces were gutted for their movements. And then, of course, what took its place was significantly more conservative forces in its stead.
Yeah, and Mossadegh was a good example. He was, a secular social democratic figure that won a popular election, and his only crime was that he was trying to say Iran's natural resources have to serve the Iranian people, and they remove him and they ensure then that there's dictatorial rule by the Shah. Oh, by the way, if you notice now, his son is coming out on the U.S. scene, using the Israel brand to make inroads into the Republican Party, and they're parading him around everywhere. It is really an interesting collusion that's taken place between two very conservative forces in the region: the force of Zionism and the force of this the Shah's successor. But in any case, what we're seeing here, Hasan, and again, I don't think people should think of this as I have to be pro Hezbollah or pro Iran or pro anything or anti anything in this part of the world. I think what we need to think about is structural realities. Structural reality, number one, is that there's a settler colonial order. Okay, that regardless of who leads it or who is opposed to it, in terms of ideology or political affiliation, the structure determines is much more relevant. So we have to understand this. There's a settler colonial order here. It will always behave in a settler colonial ways, because what settler colonialism is, and we keep on saying this term, but let's specify what it is. There were people living in that land before. Another group comes in from outside, in this case mainly Eastern Europe. It comes in, shows up, and says, it's no longer your land, I'm going to expel you. And then the whole region has to deal with that. Okay. This group also expects then that nobody should attack it for expelling this people or oppressing it or killing it. And if it decides to annihilate the indigenous population, as it's trying to do in Gaza today, then everybody's meant to be silent. All right? That's not going to work. Okay. Secondly, the second geopolitical structural reality is that there is a history to the settler colonial behavior that has affected the region as a whole. But it's also a history that intersects with the American entry into the region. Okay, so this settler colonial state fought multiple wars with almost every neighbor. Actually, not almost. It fought multiple wars with every neighbor. So it has fought wars against Egypt, killed a lot of Egyptians. And these were major wars of aggression.
No, you don't understand. They were the victims in all of that.
Of course. In 1956, when they conspired with the British and the French to invade Egypt and take away Sinai and march to Cairo even, they were the victims. In 1948, when these Zionist militias were expelling people from their homes, and basically ethnically cleansing the whole of Palestine, they were victims. And they say, oh, invading Arab armies, we're fighting against it. No, you weren't. You're fighting actually against the Palestinian people and did not want anybody to defend that people.
Yeah, it was interesting because there was no armies in Deir Yassin. It was just the only army presence, I guess, was the terrorist militias that came in and committed atrocities against the civilian villagers that had actual peace pacts with the Israeli villages in the region. As a matter of fact, that were a part of the planned Dalit.
Right up till May 15. 1948, there wasn't a single Arab army in the whole region, okay? And it was basically Palestinian villages being attacked and ethnically cleansed for no less than 6 months. And they had actually emptied out most of the main cities during that period, by the way. Haifa was ethnically cleansed before any single Arab army entered. Jaffa, the same thing. These were the major, most important Arab cities. We can go on and on about this, Hasan, but the main point to emphasize here is this settler colonial group is not a victim group, okay? It is very much in the Middle Eastern context using policies of aggression. It refers sometimes to the legitimate history of Jewish oppression and victimhood in Europe in order to cover up for these crimes, which is actually terrible that they're doing that. They should not be referring to that history in this way. And now the additional thing to note here is that what about Palestinians? What about Palestinians? What about the Arabs next door? What about the Iranians and everybody else in the region that has suffered from this project? We don't talk about that. The whole region rejected the partition of Palestine. By the way, partition plan is a misnomer. It should be called the setting up of a settler colonial state in Palestine. That's the real, what really happened then. But every state in the region had actually rejected that, including all the Arab states, including Turkey, including Iran, they all understood what it meant. It meant a disaster. It meant a disaster. And now we have to actually work on finding a common future beyond this disaster that took place. There has to be, especially after this genocide, we have to rethink everything. All the main precepts have to be rethought. We have to imagine a future of justice and equality for everyone. A future in which Jews and Arabs of all religious denominations and Iranians and Turks and Kurds and Armenians, everybody in this region can find a way forward beyond the ethnic tensions and religious tensions that are encouraged by this very violent settler colonial regime. By the way, I'm not saying that this region does not have problems of its own that preceded the arrival of the settler colonists. Of course it did. Every part of the world has internal strife. Every part of the world has serious problems. However, the impact of settler colonialism has been horrendous. And today we're seeing it. They're trying to drag the region into a war. Iran has said multiple times, we don't want to get dragged into the war. Even the Iranian president this time, after this strike, he just said that. They don't want war. They want, in fact, de-escalation. They want the genocide to stop. They want the political solution to be considered. They want respect for Lebanon's sovereignty. How is it allowed, by the way, Hasan? They keep talking about Israeli security. Why is it allowed for Israeli warplanes to go and bomb Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq and Iran at will?
Yeah.
No respect for the sovereignty of these countries for decades, not for a year or two. But if one rocket enters the Israeli airspace, this is a serious violation of Israeli security. And why? Why are they better than all these countries combined?
Yeah.
Why is it that? And we sometimes forget things. Why is Israeli piracy in the high seas allowed? Now they talk about Yemen. they're attacking the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea and so on. Why was the Mavi Marmara, Turkish ship, why was it attacked? And it's the people on it who were peaceful peace activists. They were killed in cold blood in the high seas, and everybody was supposed to shut up around that and say nothing. How is that acceptable?
No, it's not. I mean, Israel is also even allegedly. Israel allegedly also blew up an American Navy ship as well, the USS Liberty attack. So it's just as long as it corresponds, as long as it corresponds to American state interest, like it's not like the United States of America cares about its own civilians or its own citizens or its own military members either. If they did, they would not send thousands overseas to go defend its national interests, to go and I guess, I don't know, maintain a security posture over opium fields in Afghanistan, only to get shot by people that live there, that want them out of there, or in Iraq as well, to have IEDs explode under their Humvees. If they truly cared, they wouldn't be engaging in such acts and lying to go to war and consistently do military occupation in these areas.
This brings us to our responsibility as Americans here, because let me be very clear. I have an allegiance to the betterment of the lives of American people, our sisters and brothers that are living in terrible housing, our sisters and brothers that do not have access to healthcare, the total oppression that we're seeing here in our own country is unspeakable. I mean, I see it every day. These, and where is the money going to? Wars, endless wars. This project of domination. They've just supported the Israeli state with an enormous package. This $16 billion package that went there. You could fix the whole homelessness problem in the major American cities. I mean, I know in Houston it would not cost nearly as much here where I live. It would not cost that much to fix homelessness. You would be able to actually support health programs, support programs for our kids, for our schooling, for the education system that is collapsing. So actually, when we talk about visions for the Middle East, it's also interconnected with a conversation about visions for the United States internally. What kind of society do we want to build here as well? Is it a society that disregards the interests of the people at home in order to expand imperial wars abroad and support settler colonial states like the Israeli state abroad? Is that really what we want? Or do we want a better future for everyone, including Israelis, by the way, themselves? They don't even know this. But this permanent war model is not good for them. But more importantly, actually, it's not good for the people that are living under their boot, the Palestinians, the surrounding Arabs, the Iranians, everybody else in this part of the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for coming on. It was delightful and very informative. Professor Abdel Razzaq Takriti. Am I saying that right, by the way? I don't
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much, Hasan.
Sorry. Is there anything else you'd like to say before I let you go?
Well, I'd like to end on a note, noting that basically this program of assassination, spreading terror, and wreaking havoc will not work in the long run, and will not work even in the short run. You cannot kill causes. You cannot kill causes by killing leaders. There will be other leaders that will come up. I mean, the history of Hezbollah is a good example, but also history of the Palestinian movement, and whether we talk about leftist parties or we talk about religious ones, or any other political movement that we've seen in the region. They will survive against assassinations. The real issue, the only thing that will allow for progress and change, is actually structural change. And that's what we need to be talking about. And I hope that people here will think about it. And that means thinking about the political and national rights of the Palestinian people and thinking about respecting the sovereignty of the states that surround historic Palestine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor. Also, tell Daniel that he's wrong when he said you're a low-tech scholar. He's wrong about that. You nailed it. You got it dialed in. You have the Discord and everything.
Thank you so much.
And a wonderful backdrop. Thank you so much, Professor. Have
I
a great day.
appreciate you, Hasan, and looking forward to seeing you again. Take care.
All right, bye. Once again, chat, that was an incredible incredible guest for us. Professor Abdel Razzaq Takriti teaches modern Palestinian and Middle Eastern history at Rice University. Fantastic guest. He had a podcast episode with The Dig with and I hope you guys check out his stuff, his work. He has it's a series called Tabra. I think I'm saying that right. I hope I'm not saying that wrong.